So I've been watching this happen in slow motion for years, and I finally just need to talk about it out loud because nobody in the creator space is actually having the honest conversation about it. And they just they seem to be dancing around it or screaming about it from one extreme, or they're just not touching it at all because it's uncomfortable and might piss off their audience. And I get that. I do. But I think that's exactly why we need to talk about it. Here's what I keep seeing, and this is across the board. It doesn't matter if you're a storyteller, a vlogger, a writer, a photographer, an artist. I keep seeing people who have completely lost the ability to just be somewhere without filming it, without captioning it, without already thinking about how to post it. And again, I want to be clear up front. I'm not about to sit here and say, social media bad, go touch grass speech. That's not what this is. That's the lazy version of this conversation, and you guys deserve better. Much better than that. What I actually want to talk about is something way more specific and honestly kind of uncomfortable because it involves looking at your own behavior and going, oh no. Here's the thing that started the whole spiral for me. There we go. Apologies. I was watching a creator, and I'm not going to name them because that's not the point. And they were doing a vlog of a really significant personal moment. Like, genuinely significant. The kind you would expect someone to need a minute to sit with. And I'm watching this going, they never had the moment. Like, they filmed the moment, they narrated the moment, they edited the moment, but they never actually lived the moment. It went straight from experience to content without passing through them. And I just couldn't shake that. Like, because I recognize it. Not just in them, but in myself. And the things I've done, the choices I made about what to share, when, and why. And the recognition felt important. Like, there's something here that we don't have language for yet. And I want to try and find it. Because when we talk about oversharing online, the conversation usually goes one of two directions. Either it's your trauma is not your brand, which, okay, but misses the nuance. Or the full-on social media is destroying an entire generation doomer shit. Which, okay, there's truth in that. But it's also not particularly useful as a creative or as a human being who lives in this world. The conversation I actually want to have is where does stop sharing being... Oh, sorry. Where does sharing stop being sharing and start being content? Because that shift, that's interesting. That's what I think is actually happening to a lot of us without us fully noticing. So let me start with the good stuff, because it is real and it matters, and I don't want to be dishonest about it. Posting your life online creates connection. Genuine. I've seen people find their lives through the most specific niche, I can't believe this resonates with anyone kind of content. Someone posts about a really specific type of loneliness and 1,000 people go, wait, me too. That's not nothing. That's actually extraordinary. See, the internet has this crazy superpower where it can take the most isolated human experience and suddenly make it sound communal. And it documents things like the fact that so many people have a visual and written record of their lives that previous generations didn't have. That's something beautiful. My grandparents have like 12 photos from their entire childhoods. 12 photos. And I have a folder on my phone with 12 photos from last Tuesday. And it builds community, real community. The kind where people who would have never found each other in a physical space can find each other through a shared obsession, a shared craft, or a certain way of seeing the world. So none of this is me saying the thing is bad. It's not bad. It can be a genuinely good and powerful thing. But, and here's where I want to slow down. Something shifts when everything becomes the thing. When the habit of sharing goes from I'm choosing to document this to I document everything, therefore this gets documented. When there's no filter between the experience and the post. When living and broadcasting become the same gesture. That shift is subtle. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. And I think that's why it's so easy to miss unless you're already pretty deep in it. Okay, so let me talk about someone who is arguably the most extreme example of what happens when that shift goes completely unchecked. And I know everyone knows this story. I know it's been talked about. But I want to come at it from a completely different angle than the usual he was reckless and irresponsible take. Because I think that framing actually lets the rest of us off the hook too easily. Logan Paul. I'm going to butcher this name. Sorry, guys. Aokigahara Forest. 2017. If somehow you don't know, Logan Paul filmed and uploaded a video where he and his crew encountered a real body in Japan's suicide forest. Although that's not the actual name, obviously. But what stuck to me was he kept the camera rolling. He included that footage. He posted it. It got millions of views before it came down. And the fallout was enormous. Now, the easy take, the easy way out, is he was a bad person who made a horrific decision. Well, yes, obviously. But I think the more interesting and uncomfortable take is he made the decision he'd been trained to take. I'm not excusing it. Stay with me, though. Logan Paul's entire brand, his identity as a creator at that point, was built on the premise that everything was content. Every moment, every reaction, every experience, it all went in. That was the model. After all, that was what worked. That's what his audience expected, because that's what got views. So, when he encountered something that was categorically, viscerally, obviously not content, a human death, a moment of profound tragedy that had nothing to do with him, the habit was so deeply ingrained that the camera stayed on. The decision-making process that would have said, stop, this is not yours to film, had been so thoroughly overwritten by the default of film everything that it just didn't register. And that's not a character flaw. That's what a mindset does when it has no limits. When the content brain becomes the only brain. And I think about that a lot. Not because I think most of us are going to end up in a forest with a camera and a terrible decision in front of us, but because the mindset that led there, it exists on a spectrum. And we're all somewhere on that spectrum. The question is where, and whether we're paying attention to where we're drifting. The thing about Logan Paul is that he's easy to point at because it's so obviously and catastrophically wrong. Like, you don't need a load of moral framework to go, yeah, that was bad. It's not that hard of a call. What's harder is the Kim Kardashian version of this conversation. Because here's the thing about the Kardashians, and I want to be really precise about what I'm actually saying here, because this is not a Kardashians are bad take. What they built was so impressive, genuinely from a business standpoint. Like, you can have whatever feelings you want about the content itself, but watching an entire family turn their lives into a media empire that has lasted for 20 years, 20 years, that's a feat. Super impressed. But here's what I think gets lost in all of the cultural noise about them. At a certain point, the life and the content became the same thing. Not in a they post a lot way, in a structural, operational, industrial way. The relationships, the conflicts, the milestones, the grief. It all became narrative material. It had to, because it was the machine, and the machine needed feeding. And I think keeping up with the Kardashians without anyone planning it, or maybe they did, I don't know, accidentally became this blueprint that a lot of regular creators internalized. Not consciously, but the cultural message was, your life is interesting. Your life can be the product. Your life, if properly packaged, can be the whole brand. And for a specific family, with a specific set of circumstances, and a very particular kind of appetite for visibility, maybe it works. Maybe there are people out there for whom that trade-off makes sense. But when that model trickles down to regular people who don't have a production company, a PR team, a team of editors, and 20 years of experience managing public perception, it becomes something different. It becomes this pressure, this ambient pressure that says, your life should be visible. Your life should be coherent to follow. Your life should be producing content. And if you think about it, that pressure is everywhere now. It's in how people take photos, how they talk about their relationships, how they describe their own experiences. Already slightly performing the story of it while the thing is still happening. Let me back up because I want to make sure I'm honest about something. I do this. I have done this. There have been moments in my life, real moments, things that mattered, that I was already writing captions to in my head while it was still happening. Already framing it, already thinking about whether the lighting was good or the moment was readable, whether it would make sense out of context, whether it would perform. And there's a specific feeling that comes with that, if you've experienced it. it's this slight disconnect. Like, you're in the moment and you're also watching the moment from a small distance. Like, there's a layer of glass between you and what's actually happening. I don't think that's unique to me. I think a lot of people feel this and don't have a language for it yet. And I think it's worth naming, because if you can name it, at least you can notice when it's happening. Because that distance, that's the thing that concerns me. Not the posting, the distance. Here's where I want to get into something that I think is actually useful. Not rules, not a checklist. More like 3 questions. 3 questions I've started asking myself before I post something, and they've changed the way that I think about what I want to share. And I want to be clear, these aren't about being more private. They're about being more intentional. There's a difference. Privacy for its own sake isn't the real point. Intention is the point. So for the first one, is this for me or is this for them? Which sounds simple, but is actually kind of brutal when you're honest with yourself about the answer. Because there's nothing wrong about posting something because you want connection, you want engagement, you want your work to be seen. That's legitimate. That's part of how this whole thing works. You don't have to pretend you don't care about responses. But there's a difference between I want to share this and I'd love it if people connected with it, and I'm posting this because I need the validation that comes from it. One is sharing, the other is outsourcing your worth to the algorithm. And those feel similar from the inside, but they're totally different things. And once you start being honest about which one you're doing, it changes what you decide to post. Because some things, personal, tender, still forming things, they're not ready to be tested against other people's reaction. They need to be yours first. Posting them before they're yours is just asking strangers to tell you how to feel about your own life. The second question, am I in the moment or am I already outside of it? Did I actually experience this thing first? Or did I go from this is happening directly to how do I film this? And I think this is the sneakiest one, because the habit of documenting has become so automatic that you don't even notice it's displaced the experience. You're at a concert and you film the whole thing, and afterwards, yes, you have this incredible record of the concert, but you have no memory of what it felt like to be there. You were there technically, your body was there, but your attention is already downstream, already in the post. I was thinking about this a lot in terms of travel, actually. There's this thing that happens, and I've seen it, I've done it, where you go somewhere incredible, somewhere that genuinely deserves your attention, and you spend the whole time trying to get the shot that proves you were there. But you kind of weren't. Not really. And I'm not being precious about this. I'm not saying, live in the moment, man. What I'm saying is there's a cost to this that we're not accounting for. The cost is that the experience doesn't fully land. It doesn't get seeped in. And if the experience doesn't get seeped into you, what are you even sharing? You're basically sharing a record of the thing that you don't have. Third question. Would I still value this moment if no one saw it? If this got 0 engagements, 0 likes, 0 shares, no one watched it, would it still matter to me? Would it still have been worth doing? And for some things, obviously, yes. You'd still have gone on the trip. You'd still have made the thing. You'd still have had the experience. The sharing is just an addition to something that stands on its own. But for some things, if you're honest, the answer is no. The thing exists for the sharing. It was conceived, executed, and experienced specifically in service of the post. And without the post, it doesn't have a reason to exist. And I'm not saying that's automatically bad. Some things are meant to be shared. That's the point of them. Art is made to be shared. Stories are made to be shared, and that's fine. But when the moment itself starts to only make sense as content, when your vacation only matters if it produces content, when your relationship feels real only if people are seeing it, when your grief only gets processed because it's posted, that's what I want to sit with. Because that's where I think something real gets lost. So here's what I genuinely think deserves more conversation. The specific categories of things that you turn into content can actually mess with you. Not posting is wrong, but because some things are better served by not becoming content. At least not immediately. Not yet. The first is real-time emotional breakdowns. Posting while you're still in the middle of something raw. And look, I know why people do this. It feels like connection, like reaching out, and it can create communities around hard things. And sometimes that's exactly what is needed. But here's the thing about posting from inside a breakdown. You're not processing. You're performing the processing, or you're outsourcing it to your audience, which is a really bad specific kind of dependency that's worth looking at. In my opinion. There's a difference between I went through something hard and here's what I learned from it, and I'm going through something hard, watch me go through it right now. One is a shared experience, and the other, it's almost like you're making your audience witness something you haven't witnessed yet yourself. And that creates this dynamic where their reaction shapes what the experience means to you before you've had the chance to decide what it means to you. That matters. How you make meaning out of hard things matters. And I think handing that process over to the internet before you've had any time alone is a thing that's going to come back and bite you in the ass. The second category, of course. Moments that involve other people's privacy. Relationships, conflicts, family stuff. The moment you post a fight with your partner, you've made that person part of your content without their consent. You've framed the story. You've given the audience one side, the version you choose to share. And even if your side is completely accurate and fair, which, let's be honest, our side of any story is at least a little curated, they didn't agree to be a character in your narrative. And the thing about this is that it doesn't just affect your relationship with that person, It affects how your audience responds to that person. You've potentially got thousands of people who now have an opinion about someone who never asked to be known. And I see this end really badly for people. I've seen creators post relationship drama, build audience investment in the drama, and then try to walk it back when things change. And it doesn't walk back cleanly. The audience is invested now. The story has been told. You can't untell it. And this extends beyond romantic relationships. Family members, colleagues, friends. The second you make someone else part of your content without asking them, you've made a choice on their behalf. And that's worth thinking about carefully. Third thing. Opinions and hot takes and personal realizations you haven't fully figured out yet. Oh, this one. This is one I've been guilty of a few times. So, okay, more than just a few, if we're being honest. So you have a thought. The thought feels true and sharp and important. You post it. And then 48 hours later, you thought about it more, or you got information, or you slept on it, and you realize that wasn't the whole truth. It was a draft, not real. But it's online now, and people have had reactions to it, and some of those are positive, which makes it hard to walk back. And some of those are negative, which makes you defensive, which makes you double down on a position you don't even fully hold anymore. And over time, if you do this enough, you end up with an online version of yourself that's made up of all of your draft thoughts and unfinished realizations. This slightly harder, more certain, less nuanced version of who you actually are. And that person is performing you, but they're not quite you. And then we have the fourth one. Moments you haven't actually lived yet. Going somewhere and filming it before you've had a second to take it in. Receiving news and immediately thinking I should post this. Experiencing something for the first time, and the first thing you do is reach for your phone. And look, I know, sometimes that's just how you document things. And documentation is fine and great and awesome, but I think there's something worth protecting in the first few seconds of a new experience. The moment before you know what it means, before you decide what it is. Because once you're filming, you're already narrating. You're shaping it. And the shape you give it in that first moment, that's what's going to stick. That's going to be the version that exists. And sometimes things deserve more than the first version. Okay, so let's balance this out, because everything I've been saying could start to sound like posting is dangerous. Proceed with fear and caution. That's not it. That's not the move. That's not useful to you guys. Because some things are genuinely worth sharing. Some things are better for having been shared. Some things are more meaningful when they reach other people. The stuff you've actually processed. Experiences you've sat with long enough that you can speak on them clearly instead of reactively. Perspectives that come from reflection rather than reaction. Those are worth sharing. Because they're not just yours anymore in the best way. They become communal. Things that help other people feel less alone. This is what the whole thing is for at its best. Someone out there is going through exactly the thing you went through, and they feel completely alone in it, and you can change that. That's not a small thing. That's huge. See, the moments you choose to share, not moments you felt compelled to share, not what the algorithm told you to share, not what you shared because you were afraid of being invisible. Moments where you made an active, conscious choice. I want to give this to people. I want this to be part of the world. That's kind of a different energy if you think about it. You can feel the difference when you're posting from that place versus posting from fear, habit, or compulsion. It feels more like a gift than a performance. And this is where I want to bring in two examples of people I think that do this perfectly, in my opinion. Because I don't want this whole thing to be, here's what not to do. That gets boring real fast. So Taylor Swift. And before anyone rolls their eyes at me, stay with me because she's actually an interesting case study for this conversation. Here's someone who is one of the most famous human beings on the planet, who's been subjected to almost an unimaginable level of public scrutiny for 20 years, whose relationships have been tabloid fodder, whose views have been dissected endlessly, whose every personal decision has been analyzed by millions of people. And yet, somehow, she has managed to maintain this precise line between what she shares and what she keeps. And the way she does that is interesting. She shares emotionally. Her music is deeply personal. The vulnerability is real. You know things about how she feels, how she processes heartbreak, joy, betrayal, love. You know those things because she puts them into songs. That's not performance of vulnerability. That's actual vulnerability processed, crafted, and given shape. But, if you've noticed, she shares very little about the mechanics of her actual life. You don't have access to her daily routine. You don't get the behind-the-scenes footage of her private moments. You don't know what she does on a daily basis. She has kept those things private. And the distinction she's drawing, whether conscious or not, is between expression and exposure. She expresses deeply. She just doesn't expose herself constantly. And I think that distinction is worth stealing, because a lot of creators have convinced themselves that the only way to be authentic is to be fully transparent. And that's not true. You can be deep, meaningful, authentic, while still maintaining a private self. Actually, I'd argue you can only be deeply authentic if you have a private self, because the private self is where the real thinking happens, before it's been shaped for an audience. And then there's Mr. Beast. Look, I know he's the obvious example, but I think the obvious is for a reason. And I want to be specific about what he actually is doing that works. See, his life is not the content. His ideas are the content. He doesn't post about his relationships, do emotional vlogs, give you access to what it's like being him as a human navigating the world. Instead, what he gives you is, here's a thing I built. Here's a concept I executed. Here's a challenge I created. The content is the project, not the person. And I think about that a lot in terms of sustainability. Because the my life is content model has a ceiling. You only have one life. You only have so many personal moments. At some point, you either run out of material or you start manufacturing material. inventing drama, amplifying conflict, engineering moments that perform well. Because the model requires constant feeding. But, if your ideas are the content, that's renewable. Ideas keep coming, projects keep happening, and the person behind it gets to stay mostly intact. And that brings me back to the point, which is, when did the line between your life and your content disappear? And do you even notice it? Because I think for a lot of people, and I am including myself in this, this is not me standing outside and saying, gosh, guys, we have problems. We need to go to therapy. Anyway, the line has gotten blurry in ways that are hard to see from the inside. Like, have you ever really been to a gorgeous place, a stunning environment, and found yourself thinking more about the shot than the place? A lot. A lot. Mostly to the point where the experience of being there is really the experience of trying to capture it. Have you ever had a hard week and found yourself composing tweets about it while you're still in the middle of it? Like your brain is doing PR for your own pain. Have you ever shared something really personal and spent the next hour refreshing to see how people were responding and let those responses tell you how to feel about the thing you shared? Those aren't dramatic examples. Those are extremely plain examples. That's just typical Tuesday for a lot of people, including me, and probably you. And I don't know if that's entirely fixable. I don't know if you could fully disentangle yourself from this once it becomes a habit. Like, if we're honest, the content brain never turns off. Once you've trained yourself to see your life as a potential content, you see it all the time. And I think awareness of that matters, though. Like, noticing that you're already in the post while you're staring the moment and going, okay, pause. And giving yourself the option to stay in the thing for a second before you're already past it. Because here's the thing, and this is the part I think that gets lost. Some moments do need an audience. That's real. That's honest. Some things are made better by being witnessed, shared, and reaching other people. Art is this. Stories are this. Experiences that connect us are this. Some moments need a memory, not a post, not a record. Just, they need to live in you for a while, quietly, without being curated, captioned, or presented. And some moments need privacy. Not forever, but some things need to be yours before they can be anybody else's. And if you skip that step, if they go straight from happening to content without being yours first, that's where things get lost. Things you can't really get back. And look, I think the reason people really don't have this conversation properly is because it requires a kind of honesty that's uncomfortable. It requires admitting that most of what we call sharing is actually about something else. Visibility, validation, not wanting to be alone with hard things, needing people to see us having the experience to feel like the experience was real. And these aren't shameful things. They're deeply spiritual, well, deeply human things. And they're worth looking at cleanly. Because if you're building your creative life on a foundation of, I need to feel seen to feel real, that's a shaky foundation. That's giving the internet enormous power over your own sense of self. And excuse me, and nobody tells you that when you start creating. Nobody says, hey, you might want to think about this before you make a post. Before you make posting everything a core part of your identity. It's just post, be visible, share everything, build the audience, stay consistent. When I started this, nobody talked to me about the cost of it. Nobody mentioned that there's a version of this where you wake up one day and realize you haven't had a fully private moment in years. That everything has been pre-processed through, could this be content? That you have a very detailed public record of your life and a fuzzier memory of living it. That's not a small thing. That's actually kind of significant and worrying. So I don't know. I'm not ending this with, here's the answer, because it doesn't have an answer. At least I don't think so. I think this is something that everybody has to figure out in their own way, with their own lines and according to their own values. But I think the question is worth asking regularly, like actually sitting with it, not in a panicked way, but in a brutally honest way. Do I still know the difference between sharing my life and turning my life into something to be consumed? Because when you answer that question clearly, when you can look at something and go, yeah, I'm choosing to share this, it's mine, and I know what it means, and I want to give it to the world, that's a different kind of energy. That creates different content. Probably better content, if I'm honest. Content that comes from a full person instead of someone who's been slowly hollowed out by the process. I could be wrong about this. Maybe people do their best work from complete exposure. Maybe there are creators for whom total transparency is actually generative rather than depleting. But I think they're the exception, not the rule. And I think the rest of us would do well to hold back a little more. Not for everyone else, just for ourselves. Anyway, so I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I feel like I still haven't quite landed on the thing I'm actually trying to say. Like, I know the shape of it, but the edges are still blurry. Which is fitting if you think about it. Because some things are worth talking about fully before you understand them. That's just where I'm at with it. This is WriteSparky, and I will see you in the next video.